you so much for everyone to come in. We are going to kick it off now. So if you haven't got a seat, I'd recommend you grab yourselves one. There's a few left over here. By all means, I'd move your way sort of down to the front so you can get a good view of the screen, especially if you're over that side, because this is the best view you're going to get, because this is where the speaker's standing. I'm really sorry. Yeah, I wish I could say any more than that, but I'm a bit of a lump to clear out the way. I'm going to ruin the live stream otherwise. So, yeah, we'll get things going. First of all, a bit of good news for everyone. This is by far and away the biggest SocialCode event we have ever had. So thank you very much. Whether that's in-person, live stream, anything, the numbers are kind of blowing it out the water, and there are still people coming through the door who did not read what time we were starting. But no, this is absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate it. I am too tall for this stage. Yeah. So for those of you who've been here before, you've probably heard me doing this bit. But there's a lot of people who haven't, so I'm just going to do it quickly again. So for those of you who haven't been to the SocialCode before, I sort of have an ethos that all of us work with. So we operate on 3 key principles, and the idea is that this event allows us to share knowledge within the community, and that we encourage feedback from everyone. This isn't a case of I'm telling you that this is something brilliant and you should listen to it and be perfect. We want an open, active discussion. That's why we operate a Q&A-based format at the end. But most importantly, we're a community. There's now 2,500 of you as members of the SocialCode, which is absolutely mind-blowing, considering that it started in a bedroom in lockdown. So yeah, thank you very much to everyone for that. If anyone wants to catch me or any updates on when we're doing the next stuff, those are my socials. Get a picture now if you want to follow any updates or stuff. As far as this goes, this type of event, unfortunately, this is going to be our last SocialCode of the year, just due to timing. I was expecting like an R or something like that. The good news is we are going to do something in December, so keep an eye out for that. But I also know that what you lot are like, and the reality is if I put a tech event on in December with a bunch of talks, 90% of you wouldn't turn up. So what I am going to do in December is put on a Friday afternoon pub quiz so that you all turn up, because you can call it a work event, leave work early on a Friday afternoon because it's for a tech community thing. Then you can all go for a few beers. Gary, I'm looking at you. So yeah, that's that. I just want to quickly call out a couple of people who are going to hate me for this. Joe and Lauren, there, can you wave your hands? And where's Colin and Imogen? There as well. So I know I stand up on stage and do all the talking and stuff, but the reality is behind the scenes, these people pull this all together. I don't sort the venue, I don't sort huge amounts of stuff. All of the Eventbrite stuff is sorted by them. Speakers, everything in terms of, I don't do everything, but the reality is 90% of the work is done by these people, and they've really pulled this off tonight because this is a fantastic venue. This is a really special space. We're not going to have an opportunity to do stuff like this again often, and I really just want to say thank you to the 4 of them. If we give them a round of applause, I think it's really well deserved. So yeah, that's kind of one sort of really important thing I want to get out of the way, because I'm really good at claiming credit for this, and it's really not all me. What I did want to kind of look back at is, obviously this is the biggest event we've ever done. It's part of Manchester Tech Festival, which is awesome. So we're the official fringe event for this, which is absolutely crazy. I just wanted to take people back and kind of look back at really from December 2020 where we've come. From December 2020, we went to 2021. February was our first virtual event. If any of you attended that and photoshopped yourselves into my bedroom, I've not forgiven you, and I'm still haunted by that. But the reality is we've been back in person for about 12 months, and we went from about 30 people in person to this, which is like, what, 150, 160? It's crazy. But also, we've now gone global in March 2022. So for those of you who don't know, the SocialCode is now in 2 continents. We do SocialCode events in Austin, Texas and Philadelphia as well. And we've also got the events that Colin and Imogen run here, the SocialCode product and the SocialCode tester events. So if you're interested in any of that, please do check in. Or if you're a bit of a night owl, feel free to watch the live stream of any of the Texas events. But we've come from there. But the reality is, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, because this is a community. This is something that this group of people has led. This is something that you've all turned into something really special. There's now 2,500 of you across the group. We've got 3 different events in 6 cities on 2 continents. I couldn't have done that without any of you. So the biggest round of applause needs to go to yourselves, because you've turned this into something really special. More importantly, there's some people here who've paid for the bar, which is the thing that I know you all like. I'm just going to quickly allow Gary to come and introduce himself, because also, big round of applause, Zuko paid for the bar.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, I think that you've not come here tonight to hear from me, so I'll be really, really brief. It's actually our honour to be part of the community and to sponsor the night. There's some beers behind the bar. I think there's some pizza coming as well. Really briefly about Zootech. We're on a mission to transform the car financing experience with simplicity and integrity. If you want to find out more about what we do, there's a number of us kind of sat down there, but please feel free, come over and have a chat, and we can talk about it.
Gary, thank you. Obviously, we've got 3 fantastic speakers for the evening. So we've got Rin, we've got Jenny, and we've got Dave. I believe Gareth's joining you on stage for a bit, Dave? Yep, perfect. So without further ado, I know you've all come here to listen to them and not me, and then get the beer, pizza, and there's giveaway prizes. That's why you've all got a raffle ticket. Don't lose it, because it's going to be really awkward if I have to give away something to no one. But yeah, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Jenny Dixon.
I don't like being on Tuesday. I almost fell down. All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hi. I've been told I can use this little space here, but I've told Ross that because I am a wanderer, if at any point I get close, if you guys down here could just start beeping, almost like, you almost reverse into a wall. If you could just beep, then it just lets me know that I won't get too far. Okay, so I am Jennifer Dootson. I don't have an elevator pitch. It is the worst thing in the world. So when I come to tell people what I do, I used to be a primary school teacher, and it was wonderful because people would say, oh, what do you do? And I say, I'm a teacher. And they say, okay, what do you teach? And I say, primary school. And they say, what subjects? And I say, all of them. And then we move on to the presentation. I don't do that anymore. And so this is what I do, essentially, all of those things. If you boil it down into a nutshell, what I say I do is I work with organisations to solve their people problems. I help them maximise their people potential, and I do it in lots of different ways. So I do it with individuals, I do it with teams, I do coaching, I do away days, I do lots of I always think it's all the fun stuff, essentially what I get to do. I am also Disney obsessed. Shuri is my favourite Disney obsessed. If anyone ever cares, no one ever asks me. I still make sure I tell you all. If anyone wants to debate whether Shuri is actually a Disney princess, I am more than happy to do that with you at the bar, but she's definitely a Disney princess. And I love board games. I would say board game fans, who's that? My favourite board game at the moment is one called Colour Brain. I don't know if you've played it. Haven't, I don't have shares in it, it's really weird. It's a really good board game, so that's currently my favourite board game. Old school board games, Atmosphere, the one with the old school VCR that you used to put in and the tape. It's classic. All right, so what are we talking about today? Today we are talking about this idea of creating team success with a group of individual collaborators. And for the last 15 years, I have been working with organisations on this very thing. So I often spend a lot of time working in the pharmaceutical industry, life sciences industry, which means I work with a lot of tech people and a lot of people that are individual contributors. talk about is this idea of being able to take contributor mentality and turning it into a group mentality. Now, I would argue that in any sort of team, there are some people and some roles that are more pivotal than others. Guys, why not beeping? That was a test. There are some teams which, there are certain roles which are arguably more valuable than others. Yes or no? Oh, maybe some yeses, maybe some no's. What does the teacher, what's the right answer? Okay, we'll start to talk about it as we go through. We all know this old adage of, oh, there's no I in team, but actually you are part of lots of different teams. And you end up, in all of those different teams, you end up juggling lots of different roles, okay? And you play lots of different roles. So for example, you might be part of a development team, or you might be part of a departmental team, but also you might be part of a football team, or a sports team, or a family team. And in those different teams, you'll play a different role. And what we're going to talk about today is just about those roles that you play. And what I've learned are the keys to success to turning those individual contributor roles to team roles. Okay, so what I want you to think about right now is this idea of me. Okay, just say me to yourself right now. Way more people say me than I expected. I like it. I'm very handsy, which you can't really say this and this. But when I say me, I very much focus inwards on myself. I point internally. And even if you're not realizing you're doing it, there'll be something in your body language with yourself. It's very singular. It's very focused on self. Now, say to yourself, you should be opening up your body language. And our body does this really clever thing of trying to convince us that the thing that we're saying is real. And the way that it does that is through mimicking the thing that we're thinking about. So when I say we, my body language is much more open. I'm much more, in a way, I'm much more strategic because I'm looking at you all, I'm considering you all. And so what we're going to talk about today is moving from this me to we mentality. Now, as I said, I've been working with organisations on this for about 15 years. I know, I don't look older. For about 15, you supposed to nod then. I didn't see any nods. So for about 15 years. And these are the keys to success that I think are the most important things when it comes from taking that me to we mentality. So I'm going to talk you through them to start with, and then I'm going to go through them in a bit more detail. So effective communication is the first one. That used to just say communication. And then I realized there are some teams which are really bad at communication. So I changed it to effective communication. And empathy, we're going to talk about a little bit, one of the value of empathy in a team. Respect for expertise is another thing we're going to touch on. And understanding that you are other people that are experts in their field. This idea of creating common ground and what that looks like. Role, and I would argue that number 5, acknowledging your role, is possibly the most important out of all of these. Now, like with anything that I do with individuals or organizations, it only works if you work at it, and that is the problem. Because we are all so many balls all the time, moving from project to project, that we don't often spend the time to do this stuff and invest in this stuff. And what we find is that when any sort of team gets into issue, it's really not because of the tech. So it might look like tech, but when you get under the surface, it's usually a problem, usually a communication problem. All right, so let's get into it. And so this model is Tuckman's model of phases of team development. I'm just going to use it there as a graphic because I like pretty pictures. But this idea is that teams go through all these different stages. And I'm going to talk about this in terms of effective communication and the different stages. So typically what will happen in any project is you'll have a group of people who will get together and you're going to do a project kickoff. It's that time where you all get together and start to figure out who is doing what. Now, what you can see is in the forming stage, performance is actually relatively high. And that's because we're all being overly polite. It's that time when we're being very forgiving and very kind and overly formal with one another. Then what happens is we go into this storming phase, right? And in that storming phase, we start to realize all of those differences, all of those individual differences, and we start to realize, actually, this person speaks in a way and communicates in a way that I don't like, or this person needs too much detail, or this person doesn't give us enough detail. And we get into that storming phase of not knowing how to deal with those things. And that's when our performance really dips. Norming is pretty much when we get to a point where we figure out what are our social norms, how do we communicate, how often do we communicate, what is it that we are doing as a team. And then you move into performing, which again, that's where you've got that high performance, you've got those social norms, you've got those team norms. And then finally, a journey is when your project is finished. But the problem is, when was the last time you were on a team where the team remained intact from start to finish? When you left, when the client didn't change, when you didn't have a different sponsor, it doesn't happen. So whilst we do the effective communication at the very beginning, and we do the lovely forming and storming and norming, what we forget to do is, when we get a new person, we forget to start from the beginning. So rather than it being linear, it should be cyclical. And the problem with that, like it. See, audience participation is what I need. And so part of the problem I encourage you to think about is, when someone new joins your team partway through a project, how do they know how to do effective communication with you? How do they know what the expectations are of the group? Because if you're not doing this project that you're doing every time a new person comes, then they're going to struggle with this. And the teams that do this really well know that if they invest the time, despite the fact that it is time, and I know that your time is precious, if they can take a small amount of time to do this, then it ends up yielding much better results in terms of performance. All right, so second one is empathy. And when I talk about empathy, I am talking about this idea of perspective taking, okay? We're talking about this notion of, in this world that we live in that is so polarized, the ability to take another person's perspective and say, I don't necessarily see what you're talking about, but I respect the fact that you have a different perspective, means that it opens us up to this huge chasm of ideation, essentially. It opens us up to all of these new concepts and new ways of working that we wouldn't necessarily be able to think about if we were just focused on our own ideas. Now, empathy and sympathy are two very different things. Sympathy is very much like, oh, your job sounds really hard. Whereas empathy is much more about that perspective taking. It's much more about, let me hear what you're saying. And then together, the teams that do this really well, what I've seen is, they open up this space that allows them to explore all different solutions and all different possibilities. That's empathy. Respect for expertise. This is two different things. Now, really well, respect expertise in the sense that who here is an expert in their field? Yeah, got some experts? Excellent. I would argue I am an expert in my field. But just because I'm an expert, it doesn't take away from the fact, Dave, that you're an expert either, does it? Right? It doesn't take away the fact that you are also an expert. So this respect for expertise looks like an understanding that there are people that are better at doing different things than you. Now, organizations that do this really well, there's a couple of ways they do it well. One of them is by taking the strengths-based approach. And what I mean by that is an organization who says, we want to implement a psychometric, and one that I recommend that is strength-based is Fredon strengths. And it's this idea that you start to develop this shorthand of language. So I know what you're really good at. So I am exceptional with planning. I'm really, really good at it. But I suck when it comes to attention to detail. And I suck when it comes to writing proposals and reports. So if I'm an individual and I'm looking at that me mentality, I try and do all of those things by myself. And actually what happens is 1, I do it really badly. 2, it saps my energy. And 3, I'm probably not very efficient with my time. However, when we're looking at organisations that have this respect for expertise and understand strengths-based approach, what happens is I can go to someone and say, can you look through my report? Because I suck with the attention to detail. And they're more than happy to do it. Because it's that move from that me mentality to the we mentality. And it's that focus on the group versus the individual. And that leads us to the idea of creating common ground. So organisations that do this me to we mentality really well have this ability to create common ground. Now, we very often work in silos just on our part of the project, our phase of the project, and we don't very often think about other aspects of it, or some organisations don't think of the aspects of it. Whereas the idea of this is, and the teams that do it really well, they create common ground, they figure out what is the both aiming towards. And that could be an early release, it could be a happy client, it could be getting something out on social media to show what it is that you're doing. But it's essentially creating that common ground. And we don't have things in common. And so my thing becomes more important because I've got this me mentality. When we create that common ground, it takes it a bit further and creates that we mentality. Okay, so I said that I thought that this one is arguably the most important one. And that is because this is all about people and it's about your role on your team. This model is called Transactional Analysis. It has a very wordy name. It's basically analysing transactions, which is just looking at the conversations that you have. Any sort of transaction is just a conversation between two people. Now, when you're in those transactions, you essentially can put yourself in one of these states. So most of your conversations are going to be adult to adult in any sort of given environment, home environment. And these different states are not dependent on age or anything or hierarchy. Most of the time, you're going to be adult to adult. And the organisations that I see that do this me to we mentality really well, pretty much stay in adult to adult all the time. Now, what can happen is when you are overloaded or when you are not feeling particularly resilient or when your mental health is struggling, typically what can happen is we move to either this parent or child. And parent can look like two different things. One side, you've got this critical parent. That's the nitpicker, okay? It's that person, like, why have you not done this? You need to be here at this time. You should be doing this thing. Why have you not completed this for me? This is not good enough. And typically when you're in parent, you're going to push other people into child, okay? And I'll talk a little bit more about child. Now, the other side of parent, I think is probably even a little bit worse. And that's nurturing parent. So do you know this analogy of the monkey on your shoulder? Anyone? Monkeys on shoulders? Yeah? Okay. So it's this idea that, imagine that you are an individual and you're walking down a corridor and there's lots of doors, and in every single door, there's a person with a monkey on their shoulder. And as you walk past, you get to the door and they say, oh, I've got a monkey on my shoulder, can you help me? And you go, of course I can, let me take that monkey for you. Now there's only so many monkeys that you can take before you can no longer walk. Nurturing parent is the person in your group who takes on all of the jobs that other people don't feel like they can do, rather than helping people to create solutions, okay? Now, on the other end of that is child. So you have adaptive child or rebellious child, as I like to think of. They are the people in your team who are probably a little bit disengaged, and they're the ones who are like, shall we book a meeting at 3 o'clock on Friday and just let's look up? Right, we can just say we're doing work, but instead, let's just go and get drunk together, okay? And there's always a time for a rebellious child, but actually most of the time, you want to be in this adult to adult. You've then got free child, and free child is just like, screw it, I don't care about the rules, I don't care about your deadlines, you can say whatever you like to me, I'm just going to do it my way. None of those ways are particularly effective when you're trying to move from that me to we mentality. And so what we say with teams, what we see with teams that are really effective at this is that they know how to stay in adult. Now, what's really key and what I would love you to think about is what role do you think you play in your teams? Are you an adult most of the time? Role. And then when we started to talk at the very beginning, I talked about not just being work teams, but home teams and sports teams and all the other different teams that you're part of. Do you always play the same role? And what is the impact of that on your role? Okay, so we have gone through all 5 of these things, and we talked a little bit around that effective communication. And empathy is very much about that perspective taking, but also perspective giving. Respect for expertise. Don't forget to talk to Dave. He is an expert in his field. Creating that common ground, and then also acknowledging your role using that transactional analysis, that parent adult. I said it only works if you work at it. Okay? What I'm going to leave you with is this idea of we are all juggling so many balls all the time. How do you make sure that you're not dropping the glass ones? Thank you for your time. Feel free to connect with me on social.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. That was fantastic. One of the most interesting talks we've seen in so long. If anyone's got questions, we've changed up for once and actually invested in some roving mics, which is really nice. Colin, I'm nominating you as the roving mic person. If anyone's got a question, please raise your hand and make it run. If anyone over here wants to ask a question, it'd be way more amusing because we're going to make it go further. But anyone? Any questions so far? Got one here? Colin, can you bring the mic up?
It's not working.
It's not working. Right now.
Hello.
I've got to go all the way around here.
Saturday night sit with.
I'll do the other roving mics with you. If you've got a question, please raise your hand. I'll come for the other one.
Mentality of the child behaviors. Is there value in it? But I would, and as I was talking about child, right, and rebellious child, absolutely, there's always a time for it. The majority of the time you want to spend in adult to adult, because that is when you are present, it's when you're in the moment, it's when you're free from judgment. It's also when you're the most logical as well, so free from that emotion. But yes, absolutely, I agree. Sometimes you want to challenge everything I say. But I would argue that you can create that whilst being an adult to adult. Okay, thank you.
That was a great talk and loads of really good insights. I felt like I bounced from parent, child, adult, everything based off sort of the requirements of a project or requirements of our team. How do you sort of align with just being an adult, or what value is there from being sort of open to different ideas and going via the two of them?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and actually there's things you can do online where you can see how much of your time you spend in the different areas. And what you might find is that there'll be certain people or certain situations that trigger you. That put, yeah, I can see now. There's definitely different people. And what you'll find is it's just about being aware of those and almost not allowing that other person to put you in a situation. I know that when I first started to learn about transactional analysis, I was like, I am definitely in parent all the time. Like I'm probably more critical parent than nurturing parent. But when I started to look more into it, I was like, no, I'm a rebellious child. I'm a rebellious child through and through. And there are certain things that will put me in those spaces. I would just say, just be aware and try and pull yourself out. And that can look like when you're an adult to adult, just being like, okay, I hear you. I just want to take a moment and then start the conversation again.
Thank you. We've got another one over here for you.
Is it about Disney? Sorry, it's not Disney.
I have one answer. I wanted to ask about, so in tech teams or in software engineering teams, it's really important to create like an environment where people feel that it's okay to ask questions and to be vulnerable. And I wondered if you have any tips, particularly for the forming stage of the team, to set that kind of psychological grounds for like psychological safety.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the psychological safety side of it is so important. My biggest tip is invest in the time, because I think we so quickly jump to, right, let's get the work done, and then also having regular check-ins. And when you do get feedback that is maybe not positive, allowing the space for that feedback, because I know that, and I do it myself, right? If I'm caught off guard and someone gives me, and I'm like, oh, that presentation was a bit enough, then I will sometimes react in a way that I wouldn't necessarily want to, versus just being like, okay, tell me more. That's probably one of the biggest hints I would give you, is ask people, tell me more. Okay.
Thank you very much. Before we move to any live stream questions, does anyone else have a question in the room? Please raise your hand while you've got a chance. Oh, we've got one over there. Run. Exercise all the week.
What's your car doing?
So they give us some great tips about how to like bring yourself out of one of these states. But if it's someone you're working with is in like parent or child, and maybe they don't realise it or they don't know how to get like themselves back into that. Do you have any tips on how to like coax another team member back into that adult relationship?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, is the first thing that I'll say. I know from home life, sometimes my husband will put himself into critical parent, and it's difficult to drag him out of it, regardless of the fact that all he does is hear about this. I think it's really difficult. I would say telling that person what you need from them is probably the first step to that. So if you know you work with someone who ends up in nurturing parent, right, carries your monkey, saying to them, what I need from you is help to create a solution. I don't want you to take the monkey, I just want your help to create a solution.
Last call for any questions in the room before we move to the live stream. So I've even had questions come through off Twitter. So last call, anyone? Colin, do you want to take any questions that have come through?
Apparently we don't have any.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Can we have one more round of applause for
Thanks, everyone.
Jenny goes upstairs, I want to explain why we put Jenny on first. I got a message 3 days ago that said, please put me on first, I want tequila. So if anyone would like to get Jenny a tequila shot, I think she's earned it, because that was absolutely fantastic. So we'll have one more round of applause. So we're going to take a 10 to 15 minute break now. I don't know if anyone at the bar can answer this. You drank and drive Peroni before we even started. Have you got more Peroni now or not? Yes, we've got more Peroni. Brilliant. I think, is there food available yet or not? Oh. Yes, there's food available as well. 15 minutes, go and get some food and stuff. Live stream, be back in 15 minutes because we'll do a giveaway for the live stream and in person as well, and move on to our next speaker. Right, can I ask you raffle ticket when you arrived? Could you please all get your raffle tickets out now, ready to go? So we're still over there. Can we just come back to our seats, please? We're all ready to go for next talk. Thank you. I don't want to go into school teaching mode, but if we can keep it down just so that the people on the live stream can hear this, that would be fantastic. Okay, so we're going to do simultaneous giveaways because I keep promising people on the live stream that they are going to get the chance to win something, and I keep not delivering on that promise, but we've actually done it tonight. So to those of you on the live stream, there is a chance to win a £50 Amazon gift voucher right now. Spend on whatever you want. To not distract the people in the room, in the question typed out, Lauren. So on the count of 3, Lauren is going to put a question into the chat. The first person to respond correctly is going to win the £50 Amazon gift voucher. We do have 4 prizes to give away in the room tonight, which I'll come to in a second. But Lauren, 1, 2, 3. So Lauren's going to deal with that, and you all get to keep entertained by having some free stuff to win here. We have got bigger prizes, but the first 2 that I wanted to give away for the evening, we've got SocialCode branded wireless chargers, which I've given away before, and apparently are super fast. So great win for everyone. So I have gone for the super tried and tested method of sticking everything in a double vodka cup. Feel free to buy me one of those later. But I'm going to draw 2 of these tickets now. If you've got that number, you have won yourself a wireless charger. So the first number I've got, if anyone's got 185, please make yourself known. 185. Hey, make your way up. Round of applause, or is everyone better? Who got it? Got yourself a lovely branded wireless charger there. Thank you very much. And our second wireless charger, I'll shake those around a bit so it's not biased completely. Second wireless charger, 119. Oh, who was that? Hey, make your way up. Well done. Just before we get our next speaker on, first of all, I promise there's going to be more pizza. It's going to come out while you're away. I promise the bar is not going to run out of pepperoni. Mary, if you could raise your hand for a second, has just stuck some more money behind the bar, so you don't keep getting drunk. Possibly, I should add that. We're not going to have any incidents caused by that. I just wanted to take some time to introduce our next speakers instead of speaker. We've got Dave Francis here, who has worked with Foresight Mobile for a while and presented a really interesting talk to us. We've also got Gareth Rees from Foresight Mobile, who's going to be joining Dave on stage as well. This is the first time we've ever done a duo talk. I'm expecting Ant and Dec. We'll see what comes of it. But no, absolutely fantastic. Really enjoying the evening so far. One last thing to add is another 20 of you creeped in during that talk, so this is now pretty much double our biggest event ever. So congratulations, everyone. But more importantly, for our second talk, I'm going to introduce Dave Francis and Gareth Rees from Foresight Mobile. Just Dave, because Gareth's not got up yet. Are you joining us, Gareth, or not? You're coming in. Okay, no problem.
Never give a blow. Actually, start sounding good. But right, can you all leave me at the back, by the way? A bit louder. Okay, right. Right, also, it's good evening to everyone. Right, okay. There we are, the technical. Right, hello folks. My name's Dave Francis. I'm the marketing manager for a company called Foresight Mobile. As we've just said, friend and colleague and boss, better get that one in. Gareth Rees down here as well, he's the CTO. Why we call Foresight? Because we actually work at the forefront of mobile technology. It's the latest technology possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you a chat about basically the future of mobile apps. Now, of course, we've all got mobile phones. If I did a show of hands, 100% of people here would have some form of mobile or smartphone. Now, smartphone technology is changing as well. It will change in some very interesting ways in the next couple of years. But we're going to bracket that with the history of mobile computing. I do that because I'm very old. Gareth does the future because he's very clever. So basically, let's just start off. I'm going to try and predict the future. It's always dangerous doing predictions for the future. A bloke called Alex Luty, by way of example, who was the CEO of the Luty Vacuum Cleaner Corporation, in 1955 said within 10 years, everyone would have a nuclear-powered vacuum cleaner. So this, as you can imagine, didn't go down too well, and actually didn't happen, obviously. 12 years before him, the head of IBM was asked a serious question, and of course at the time computers were absolutely massive, made of valves and took up an entire room. Someone said, how many computers do we need in the world? And the head of IBM at the time turned around in 1943 and said, we need 5. And that was going to be the world basically conquering the computers. There's a few other stories like that with Charles Darwin's grandson turned around and said, no, we need 3 in England and 1 in the rest of the countries in the rest of the world. So basically, I used to lecture in early computers. I could go on about this for ages, but there's all kinds of weird technologies which come together to actually produce what we now have, which is a completely mobile environment where what we take for granted is, you know, was science fiction a few years back. So starting off, old computers made all kinds of weird stuff. To give you an idea, memory in old computers used to work on the fact that to actually keep something in RAM or random access memory, you take a 5-foot tube of mercury and fly sound waves down. When it got to the end of the other 5-foot of mercury, as it slowly travelled down, it would either be re-amplified or lost again. So that's your memory. Alan Turing said, well, you know, it's really a bit inconvenient. Why don't we use Jim instead? So things like mercury-related memories and stuff like that were part of all the technologies, things like radar, punch tape, and things not combined with mobile apps, lots of previous computers we now know them. Just going on. Well, hey, what the hell is happening here? Next one. Okay. Right. Let's start off in 1965. When I was born, over in MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a group of old ladies were sitting there knitting the memory for the world's most advanced computer, which at the time was the lunar lander. And basically, they were taking a load of ferrite cores and knitting them together with about 2 kilometers of wire, which gave you 72 bits of memory. So I think what I'm trying to say is that modern computers have no relation to what went on in the past. What we have now is a situation whereby, if you have a look at the phone, the transistors in that phone are 5 atoms across, and it works at incredible speeds. Basically, the time it takes for one to 1 meter is the time it takes for your phone to do 1 instruction. So we've moved on a hell of a long way from 1965. Right, if I start, let's look at 1973. For some reason, this isn't working, but this was the smash app at 1973. 1973, the technology was so primitive that no one even thought about mobile computing. I think that's not working, but basically, there are 3 channels on the television, which went off at midnight. The technology was virtually non-existent. And here we go, but no sound. What a shame. So this went viral in 1973, but as you can see, the Martians have discovered potato, which everyone smashes to tiny pieces. And the tagline of it was they're clearly the most primitive people, which were in 73. We had absolutely no technology whatsoever. In fact, as you can see, this was the height of fashion, belted sweaters. So, for those of you who weren't born in 73, I'm expecting that's most of the audience. Take it from me, it was pretty good. I mean, it was really good. So, this is a few months after the last moon landing. The computing power which sent NASA to the moon is the equivalent of modern scientific calculator. And, you know, it's just absolutely astonishing. We made it. So mobile phones are very, very primitive. I was in France in about 73, and we were in Brittany. Someone said, "Can we ring Paris?" What? No chance. And it took them all day to actually ring through from Brittany to Paris. There was absolutely, you know, there was no such thing as satellite communication, but he can have a noted spectrum, which is great. And then, 1973, out comes, I'm studying then, the first what we actually looked at as a mobile phone. And here it is, the Dynatac. Company called Motorola, who was one of the biggest producers of phones anyway, as a joke, decided to actually produce a mobile phone. It's not much of a mobile phone. Basically, the first call we made on it was made to a wrong number on national television, which didn't go down too well. This could store 30 individual phone numbers. It costed probably 10 grand. And it took 10 hours to charge up because at the time, there wasn't even anything like a lithium-ion battery, which was just being looked into at the time. You can still get them on eBay. It costs about $10,000 on eBay. I would say to stay clear of it. It's not an anti-big future. It's definitely a worthwhile jump, basically. So, what happens then? Well, a fusion of technologies comes together to actually give us a mobile phone. And one of the things was, as some people here will just about remember, was the dawn of the home computer. So IBM, of all people, the people who said we need 5 computers in the world, then released mobile PC, the home PC. The only reason we actually released it was someone said, well, who's going to use it? Someone said, well, a housewife could actually store her recipes on it. And on that basis, IBM actually released a home PC. And to kickstart the revolution, you probably going to remember the ZX 1881 by Sinclair. Over here, really, more than any other country in the world, this actually suffered, you know, home computers absolutely took off massively. Along comes Steve Jobs. Now, Steve Jobs has been actually credited for lots that we do. Steve Jobs turned around in 1983 as he released the first Apple Mac, and then said, well, in the future, we'll all be able to download software from, like, basically like a record store. So you could download it directly down phone lines. And this was absolutely, you know, revolutionary stuff at the time. But as it says down the clock, this is 24 years before the first iPhone, 5 years before the birth of the App Store. And he said a lot in that time. So basically, this is a kind of prediction which has been inflated a lot. But Steve basically turned around and said that in the future, you'll be able to download software, which was just, you know, unbelievable at the time. They up. There we go. Now, at the same time, a lot of different technologies come together. Anyone here remember Yuppies from the 80s? Right, Yuppies, basically, your upwardly mobile professionals had to be seen with either a PDA, personal digital assistant, which was basically a very primitive piece of kit, or a mobile phone with some variety later in the decade, or a file fax. So by this time, Sinclair Research, who produced these ZX 1881, turned around and said, right, okay, a company called Sile, can you actually release some software that does things, software you have to type in all day, and then save. So basically, Sile is the present wrong button yet again, start producing this, which is sign organizer. Now, if you have a look, this is a very, very basic yuppie tool to organize your life. It's an operating system called Epoch, which is a very, very simple, I think it was 8-bit at the time operating system, which looked like, you know, like Super Mario, basically. Right, thank you. Right, okie dokie. I think the battery's a bit short on this one. Right, okay. So we've got Epoch, which is a very basic operating system, and we have a very simple organizer. Now, this is actually the birth of mobile computers. Computers no longer weigh 2 tons. They're not made of valves. They're not even made of transistors. They're made of microchips. You don't have to use it for things like calculating the height of artillery shell, which was 1951, or like how a hydrogen bomb would actually work, which is another thing we did. So basically, mobile computers become a bit more real world and a bit more accessible. Then, of course, 1987, you've got mobile phones, and this is one of the first ones, the CityMan 1320. So analog phones and PDAs, personal digital assistants, are actually being developed in tandem with each other. I was in a restaurant in Volgograd in southern Russia in 1999, and I was sitting down having a 3-course meal with wine, the only one in 18 months, and this group of Russian people came in, sat down next to me. One gets his phone out, starts doing the air like that. The air goes on and on and on for about 6 feet. And I try not to laugh because while it's all very amusing, this bloke is Russian mafia. So basically, towards the end of the century, we were still seeing these brick phones, which were very simple. And as you can see, all you do is basically phone people on them. There's no apps, there's no games. You have a phone which connects to a cellular network. And this is one of them. Now, don't expect me to explain GSM to you. I couldn't under any circumstances. But basically, rules were being put in place in 1991, which gave us a network you can actually get mobile phones to. So everything's coming together. You've got personal digital assistants. The idea of home computing is actually given everyone the idea that they might actually want some kind of computing power, and they might want it on the move. And you've got the network in place as well. And then in 1992, we have GSM networks, which are more advanced, and the Epoch operating system, which has come on again as well. So everything's starting to come together around about 1992, which for me was yesterday, basically. I think I had one of these in about 92 or 94, I can't remember, but it's basically miniaturization, software, systems, the whole lot is coming towards a mobile phone, but we haven't got there yet. And then 1998, this is probably one of the big catalysts. Let me see if you can actually remember these. But a phone with a game on it, Snake, and it was basically rubbish. This is it. Now this is what happens. That, like a phone comes out and I can play a game on it. It's a Snake, and this absolutely captures the imagination of the public because you can phone people up and you can play a little game on it. And it was that which probably really started popularizing mobile phones. So, 2002, wind on a bit, we've gone Snake Plus here because BlackBerry have come out with some basically rubbish. We started off with pages which says, like patient X has got like impacted hemorrhoids. Can you please, come along and have a look? And BlackBerry OS was something which was designed by BlackBerry. You could only actually write apps using BlackBerry's proprietary code. It wasn't out on the market by any chance. So, as we can see here, we've got a pager. We've also got a very, very simple phone. You've got a few functions on there. You can do like emails and so on and so forth. But these were very, very simple systems. I think they were 16-bit. I can't remember offhand, but what we then go on to, if anyone remembers these, around about 2001, Nokia started bringing out some very weird looking phones. Android, of course, came up with some very strange designs as well. But with something like this is a 32-bit operating system. It's colour. You can send and receive faxes, which were very important to some people at that time. You've got a word processor. God knows how the spreadsheet works on something like that. But you've got to send out emails, do messages, etc. So Nokia, based on this technology, started becoming one of the market leaders. And then, lo and behold, the first iPhone, 2007. So this is pretty recent. This is only 15 years ago. But as you can see, it's a typical Mac product in the fact that it's incredibly well designed. It can do a few things. With this, we've got text, calendar, photos, camera, YouTube, for some reason, check the stocks, there's a calculator, clock on it, and there you go. We've actually got the first really viable mobile phone, which you can do things, it's got some relevance to you, and there you are, you're out in the real world. So, by the same token, we've got iOS, or basically Mac OS at the time. Along comes Android, released on something called the HTC Dream. How anyone actually thought that was a piece of ergonomic design is quite beyond me, but you know, it's the first step forwards for Android as an operating system. Now, Android's a version of Linux. Linux was written by 3 men with beards in a shed, and a dog, and the dog probably had a beard as well. But that was Linux. There were all different kinds of different flavors with Linux. I used to work in high-level IT. I was basically an Oracle database administrator who used Linux all the time. It's horrible. So basically, Android produces this open source operating system, which is basically a flavor of Linux. Although Gareth might disagree with me there. Yeah, he's nodding. So the thing is, at the bottom, big point, anyone can write Android or mobile apps. It's open source. BlackBerry isn't. What do you think is going to happen? Well, the App Store opens up for a start, and with 500 initial apps. This is Steve Jobs making predictions again. But the iPhone 3 has got inbuilt support for the App Store. You can go there and you buy whatever you want. So Texas Hold'em poster, poker, you know, there's a simple anatomy thing there, eBay, etc. So, who can say what the first mobile app is? Really nobody, because they've actually released 500 at once. So, you know, there we go. Unfortunately, you can't turn around and say this was the first mobile app. But growth becomes massive. Right, if we look back at 2008, you can see there were only 500 apps. The digits there relate to hundreds. So going from like 500 apps all the way up to 2020, and this is estimated data because I couldn't find the right slide, but basically there were 5 million apps out there at the moment. It's spread between, I think there's about 1.78 million iOS apps, about 2.2 million Android apps. So there's absolutely millions out there. Anybody can write an app now, and they are doing it. 2009. Right, you probably all remember this one. I would contend that this was one of the seminal incidents in mobile app design, that somehow someone came up with a game which went absolutely insane. And that someone, Mr. Reese down there, because Gareth actually works on Angry Birds, and you can ask him some questions later. I've never actually played Angry Birds, so. but as you can see, from 2009 to 2015, there have been 3 billion downloads. World population 8 million, so virtually everyone except me has played Angry Birds. So what we've got now is we've got massive market penetration. We've got Android, we've got iOS. It's a 2-horse race because out comes Microsoft. Basically, Microsoft launched the Windows Phone operating system in 2010. For everybody who bought a Microsoft phone, hello, it then captured 1.5% of the market. So this is why you don't see Microsoft phones anymore, or Windows-based phones. So everybody has gone for either an Android or iOS device. This is where, and this is going back to 2010, we tend to get shoehorned into expensive mobile app development. If you all wanted to actually ring us up and buy an app now, the first thing we'd ask you is, do you want an Android app or do you want an iOS app? Because it's 50% of the market. And you would find that we'd say we'd charge you X amount for one Android app and X amount for an Apple app, or rather, we used to. Because in 2010, out comes Xamarin, PhoneGap, and Ionic. And these are methods which were actually brought out, and they're incredibly old. I mean, Ionic was built in 2005, Xamarin 2012, and Apache Cordova, which became PhoneGap, was done in, all the way around, was done in 2009. What you do is you write one set of code, you run it through a compiler, and that produces a native Android app, a native iOS app. This is called cross-platform development, which is what we do. But we don't actually use any of these three solutions anymore. Part of the history of mobile apps is that these three solutions were badly supported. They were written not with developers in mind, insofar as documentation. The fixes were just ridiculous. They started changing direction from being web-based to a web-based solution. Do we do this? No. So these were the early dinosaurs, which have died out, as we can see. So basically, where are we? Well, the market is still dominated by Android and iOS. There are more Android apps out there than there are iOS apps, which makes having an app to develop pretty expensive. If you're going to use some of the native elements of the phone, like the accelerometer, or to an extent some of the camera functions, you're best off actually using native development. So you are somewhat constrained to use to actually have either an Android or an iOS app built. However, that's not the case for most apps, and this is where we come on to the actual future of mobile apps. Around about 40% of the apps which are built now are built using cross-platform technology. Like I said, we specialise in what we call full stack because we actually saw this coming some time ago. Basically, it used to be that cross-platform apps worked at a slow speed, so they would be 9 tenths as fast as native development. So what's happened now is that the technology is completely caught up. And you might be interested to know that Flutter, which is one of the apps produced by Google, is showing signs of Google looking at world domination, which is probably what they do all the time. So it's now the present. And I shall hand the mic over to my colleague, Mr. Rees, and he can tell you where we're going from here.
My name's Gareth, and I'm a software developer. So I'm neither a lecturer nor a primary school teacher, so please treat me kindly. I've also got a problem with my throat, so I apologise in advance, and that's why I'm half drunk and I've got it. Every alcoholic needs an excuse, and that's mine. So where were we then? Let's knock it on. Let's knock it on one. There we go. I think you were supposed to do this one. So where's it running? 98% of the UK market owns a smartphone, and that's 99% ownership for some age, which is pretty much everyone here, I would have thought. 70% of all transactions are now done on mobile devices, and the decision to have an app is not similar to do I need a website, it's yes you do. So the only way that you can put a website together in 2010 is to this way. I'll have to turn my notes around though now. I'm getting Peter on my iPad now. Right, let's get that. Right, there we go. So in 2015 or 10 or whatever it was on the previous slide, the only way you can realistically put an app together is to do one Android app and one iOS app. So on Android, you're still using Java 6, which is pretty kludgy and awful. It takes them ages to move up to Java 8, and I think it's still on Java 8 now. You've got to use XML-based UI layouts, which are pretty awful, and binding it to the Java is pretty full of boilerplate. Basically, you've got thousands of lines of code for a basic button, and you've got to use Eclipse as well, which probably none of you have used that much, but it's pretty damn awful. On iOS, you've got to use Xcode, which at the time is pretty buggy and slow. You've got the interface builder, which still exists now, and is absolutely awful. So you've got a WYSIWYG click and drag editor. It's like using VB6 in 1984, and it's pretty damn awful. Also, you're forced to use Objective-C, which again, I hope none of you have ever been exposed to, but it's basically like a normal programming language, but replace every bit of punctuation with a square bracket or an @ sign. It's absolutely disgusting. If there was ever a I'm a developer, get me out of the moment, it is Objective-C. And that's what we were forced to use on Angry Birds, which is part of the reason why Angry Birds 2. Hang on a minute. Anyway, Swift's coming along, and Swift's actually quite nice, to be fair. I like Swift, but we're still with Objective-C, and it doesn't really not really sort of Swift 2 that you can get anywhere with anything. So what you're forced to do, you've got to train staff, you've got to employ staff, and if you're a web shop with a startup, you're basically in a situation where you've got to employ two new staff at least. They've got completely different skill sets. You probably need another QA engineer as well, because device compatibility is pretty rubbish at the time, and it's just basically difficult to get anything done. As Dave said, you do get Ionic and PhoneGap, and they're basically web apps wrapped up into a mobile phone app. So it's great if you've already got a web-based app, you can wrap that up, but really the user experience is going to be pretty rubbish. Anything to do with animations or anything that you consider normal user interaction processes on a normal app is pretty much out of the window, really. You've also got Xamarin, which is like a C# wrapper around all of the native APIs. So if you're already a C# shop, that's fine, and you can use C#, and you don't have to use any square brackets or @ signs, but it's you're still basically writing the same app twice, but just in the same language. So it's a bit better, and it's all right if you know C#, but if you don't, it's just adding a layer of complexity to it. So there's a bit of a gap in the market, really, for cross-platform. You obviously want one code base. You don't want to be learning 2, 3, 4 different languages for the whole of your team. You want to use one language. It's easier to resource and it's easier to train, obviously. And you want one standard architecture between your apps as well. So I don't know whether you're aware, but an iOS and an Android app, a totally different architecture. There's obviously efforts to make those quite similar, but it just doesn't really work out. So, and fundamentally, if you're a startup or a business, you want to save costs. So realistically, you want to be looking at 40–50% of the cost compared to employing all of those staff. Why would you not want to use cross-platform? And I suppose the old issues are still prevalent today, really. So if you want the real native experience and you're going to write Bluetooth plugins or integrate with hardware, that sort of thing, then really, native might be the way forward. That's always been the case, and in some ways, it's still the case now. Whenever you use a cross-platform technology, you're very reliant on plugin developers and third parties. And that might be third-party providers like ad networks or payment gateways, that sort of thing. But also, you're very reliant on the open source community. And it's really important when you're choosing a cross-platform framework, or any framework for that matter, to make sure that there's a community behind it and that's going to be supported into the future. Because most of the effort that you spend on something like cross-platform mobile development is really playing around with plugins or the native parts of your app. The user interface and the standard parts are actually quite straightforward. So, 2013, Facebook brings out React.js, which I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with. It's obviously a component-based framework. It's got declarative style, so you declare your user interface, and that user interface then responds to imports or changes in state and redraws everything, or at least that's what it seems like when you're a programmer. What actually happens is you've got a virtual DOM in the background, and as you know, only the changes are repeated in the user interface, and that becomes universally accepted as the way forward. It's still a pretty crazy architecture, really, to just completely mirror a whole website in a JavaScript array. But anyway, people think that's normal nowadays, and we just crack on with it. So, what do you do with a crazy idea that's based on web tech and nothing to do with mobile? You make a mobile framework out of it. So, in 2015, Facebook bring out Facebook React Native. Basically, at the time, the Facebook app's based on HTML5. It's based on web technology. It's pretty rubbish, really. The user experience isn't great. So teams within Facebook say, right, let's put together some new technology, and you know, we can decrease the size of our team, make it look nice, whatever. It's all developed in-house. It's got the same sort of declarative programming style. So, but instead of having a shadow DOM, it's like the whole mobile user interface. So whenever you change something, it'll draw a new button, etc. But it all works well. It lets teams that are usually based on React or JavaScript trained teams develop mobile apps. You don't have to learn Objective-C or Swift or Java or Kotlin. It's all good, and it's still used quite a lot, to this day. So all great, really. One thing I would say is don't try porting your React app over to React Native. It isn't the same thing, and it generally goes quite badly for various reasons. I'm just trying to crack on now. And the performance can be quite poor, or at least it was in 2015. So I don't know whether you're aware, but if you write this JavaScript app that runs on a mobile phone, it's forced to run in an interpreted runtime. So this interpreted JavaScript runtime basically gets a tin can, and it's got a piece of string tied to it, and at the other end of the tin can is the native side of the app. And so you say, right, draw me a text view, it goes down the string, opens up on the other side, and then some native code draws you a text view. And it carries on like that for years and years. They sort of improve it over time, but it's really just playing around with the same sort of poor architecture, I suppose. Sorry, I'm trying to crack on through a lot of stuff. So in 2018, Google bring out Flutter. It uses that same declarative user interface and reactive architecture, but the main difference is it's all in the same ecosystem. So it doesn't really try to send stuff down the wire and make a button or a text view. It just renders to its own canvas, its own OpenGL canvas. So it totally cuts out a lot of the architecture problems that came with React Native, and it becomes cross-platform. You can write using the same language, the same code base, but it just doesn't have the architecture problems that come with React Native. So it renders to its own OpenGL view, and because of that, a lot of the plugins and things a lot more straightforward. It's a lot easier to make a consistent user interface. So a lot of these cross-platform architectures, they advertise themselves on being able to provide platform native look and feel. Something React Native does quite well. Something Flutter has to emulate a bit like an old Java Swift app, really. It just draws widgets that look like the platform native ones. The reality is really that most customers and most product people, they actually want quite a consistent user interface across both of the platforms. So it's actually generally quite a good thing. And then in 2021, Flutter 2 comes out, and this is the first release first public release of Flutter Web. And really, it's the first time you can realistically write the same code base that runs on a mobile app and runs on a website at the same time. It's not for everybody. It's not going to be the best at SEO. But if you're going to write the next Netflix or the next, I don't know, let me just go on my notes to find. But yeah, if you want to write like Spotify or something like that, then this is pretty much the way forward, really. If you're writing a proper sort of desktop style app, then literally that same code base can run on mobile and run on the web. And realistically, what do we use it for? If you're doing, say, QR code scanning to bring up a menu or something like that, obviously saves time installing the app, so you can just run the same app straight from the web view. It also means we can use the same architecture and code base for things like admin interfaces, that sort of thing. Flutter 3 comes out in 2022, so that supports macOS, Windows, Linux, that nobody cares about because it's written by two blokes with a beard and a dog with a beard. But yeah, one day Linux desktop will take off, and everyone will be able to buy Lenovo laptops for £3.50 and get a really nice desktop experience. But yeah, maybe in 15 years' time. It's got native interoperability with Java and Kotlin and Swift, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for us putting cross-platform apps together makes a big difference. If we want to touch the native side of the operating system, then we can do so quite easily. There's no native bridge for us to work across. And it's officially the most used mobile framework because it says so on a graph that I found on the internet. So it must be right. But yeah, our survey says 42% of developers prefer Flutter, apparently, against 38% on React Native. Not that I dislike React Native, but I am slightly biased, I suppose. It's all right. It does a job. 2022 and beyond. I'm going to try and hurry up now because we said we're running a little bit late. But yeah. What will happen in 2022, Dave? I don't know. So yeah. So in my opinion, anyway, I think there'll be a convergence of mobile and desktop platforms. So it's something Apple have done for years and years. And you can see, oh yeah, my iPad here, it's nearly a laptop. It's getting there. But if you buy a MacBook Air, it's nearly an iPad, etc. Google Chromebooks. Will it become Fuchsia? Will that become a united operating system? I'm not quite sure. Microsoft Surface as well. Just looks like an iPad, really, doesn't it? It's got a touch screen. On the software side, I think platform vendors are going to try and more closely integrate with the software. There's not a lot of margin in selling Windows licenses anymore, so obviously Microsoft trying to get in on the hardware side of things. Yeah. That's about me, really. Everyone's looking hungry, thirsty, and wondering when the next round of peace is going to come. So I'll hand over to any questions. I'm a colleague.
Thank you very much. That's not fixed like I thought it was. First of all, I'd like to say if Manchester ever had an answer to Max and Paddy, we found it. I hate to have to do this. We've genuinely not got time for any questions at the moment. If anyone does have any questions, please grab Gareth and Dave at the end. If there's any live stream questions, we will sit down Gareth and Dave at the live stream of the chat. There is loads more pizza. We're going to take a 10-minute break now before we come back to the final talk of the evening. I hate to overrun 4 slides of details in there, but we'll catch you from there. Mike. So if everyone could make their way back, the good news is I do have more stuff to give away, and we've upped the ante a little bit. So yeah, if everyone could make their way back to their seats, that would be absolutely fantastic. Lauren, can I just confirm that I've got everyone's rapid tickets in this cup, yeah? So, to those of you who are still at the bar, or those who takes me to the drink and everything, can I ask everyone to get their raffle tickets back out before I introduce our next speaker? And just to keep it fair, I'll tip everything out and completely flat rather than just having stuff on the top, and then I'll put it back up before our next speaker comes up. So I do want to say thank you to the people at Oscar for this, especially Lauren who's sorted this out. I think it might be Lauren and Joe. Joe's taking the credit for this. I don't want to leave him there. So we've up the ante a little bit. We've got 2 Razer Basilisk X Hyperspeed mouses ready for everyone to go. They are the 5G enabled version to use wireless, so it's not running slow. So any gamers out here, are going to be living the dream, but the reality is it's the mechanical mouse that will make life a lot easier if you are working in IT. So for our first winner, can I please get number 180? Number 180 anywhere? Number 180, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to claim this. before I move on to someone else. That's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, they've lost the free mouse. Controversial, but I also know that people have been here a while and just want to get going. So, can I get number 85? Do we have a number 85? We've got 85 there. Congratulations to our winner. Congratulations, mate. There you go. Let's get your ticket as well. Enjoy your free mouse. And our last winner of the evening, I promise we'll get some more stuff in the next one. Number 195. Oh, that was quick. That was quick. Someone's not missing out on a mouse. Congratulations. I'm glad I'm not the only one who's taken a fault. Yeah? You got 2. Hang on. You're 165 now. Nice try. 2 195. Now that we've got all of that out of the way, I do want to take the time to introduce our final speaker of the evening. This is a topic that I have covered previously with the SocialCode at our very first event just shy of 2 years ago. And I've never had so much interest in having a topic return. It's a topic that I think we all need to be educated on. I think it's a topic that deserves to be spoken about by the right people. And I've held off on having this topic for some time because I waited for someone who I felt was genuinely passionate about it and genuinely was able to communicate it in the correct way. I'm going to introduce Rin now to the stage. They are someone who I have felt for some time is a great member of the SocialCode community, and I can't wait to see what we've got for the evening. So our next speaker, Irene Langford. That the right sort of distance? Should we got that right? Cool. Hello, everyone. Need a clicker? This is a good start. There we go. Okay, cool. So, I'll talk a little bit about what I call the elephant in the room, something that goes unspoken in a lot of places, and we sort of all have an understanding that something is there, but nobody really understands the full extent. Now, apologies in advance, I'm not used to doing kind of big social events, and my voice is also going, which is not helpful. So, before we go anywhere, I want to cover a little bit about who I am and why I'm doing this talk. So, my name is Irene Langford. First things first, just want to throw out there that I am non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. So for anyone chatting to me afterwards, please bear that in mind. I worked in customer services for a very long time. We're talking sort of 17, 18 years before I found my way to tech development. I am a self-taught software engineer. So just over 18 months ago, my friend Jason, who is now my manager, suggested that I start a role at Zuso, or apply for a role at Zuso. Previously, I'd only really done SQL, taught myself C#, came into Zuso, and made mid at just over a year. So, thank you. And I have ADHD and autism, which makes me neurodivergent. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means later on. A couple of fun facts. I really love dinosaurs, as you may have guessed from the way I'm dressed. So when I was about 5, my parents made the really intelligent decision to take me to see Jurassic Park at the cinema. I had night terrors for 2 weeks, and since then I've been obsessed.
I also, because that's not the full extent of my nerdiness, I also really enjoy role playing, both tabletop and live action. I'm also really into board games. I don't know where Jenny's gone, but oh, there you are. And I play a lot of PC games, mostly grand strategy games. So typically my weekends look like either me dressed up as some kind of bizarre robot, or in this case, a rat. Skaven specifically, if that means speaking to people. Yes, yes, yes. Or I'm looking at maps of medieval Europe trying to plot world domination. Oh, yes. So I want to give a very friendly warning here, folk. The stuff we're going to be talking about is, I'll describe it as spicy. It's something we've got to talk about more as not just as a community, but as a society, right? But there is a lot of discovery still being done in some of these topics, and a lot of language is still being defined. So I just want to reiterate that what I am going to say, the terms that I may be using, are terms that I'm generally comfortable with. Like any of these topics, you'll find some folk prefer different terminology. Apologies in advance if I accidentally upset anyone with some use of terminology. Please just feed it back to me, and I'll bear that in mind for next time. So, what is neurodiversity? So, neurodiversity is a word that's quite often used incorrectly. So, some people will say, oh, do you have neurodiversity? And to mean, do you have people who are neurodivergent working in a company? Actually, all neurodiversity is representing that we're all different people, right? We all think differently. The way that we look at the world is all different to one another. So when we use the term neurodivergent, oh, there we go, I put a summary, diversity of the human mind and cognitive functioning. So when we use the word neurodivergent, that typically means differing from the societal norms. So what society largely expects of people, or how most of society perceive things. That's referred to as neurotypical. So you may see people referring to others as neurotypical or themselves as neurotypical. For those of you who haven't encountered these terms before, please understand that they're not slur words. They are very much scientific words, and there's no negativity attached to either of these words in terms of scientific usage. So, what makes someone neurodivergent? So there's a few things that can fall into this category, and I'm going to give a couple of the more common, larger ones, just for clarity. This list is very much not exhaustive. So one of the big ones is autism. I would imagine most people in this room are familiar, at least on some level, with autism. We've also got ADHD. Probably slightly less people are familiar with the traits associated with ADHD, but we'll cover those in a little bit more depth in a moment. And things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, and also many more, including both physical and psychological trauma, which is something to bear in mind. Now, as with any of these kind of terms, they're still being defined. So you may find some groups will include a wider reach, because again, from my own experiences, I've primarily interacted with these types of things. We're going to focus on largely this definition of neurodivergent. So when I was putting together what I wanted to talk about here, I was trying to work out the best way to approach this topic, right? And as you may have heard from my background there, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not trained in neuroscience. So what can I, as an individual that has a bit of passion, do for folk? Well, we all recognise on some level we probably need to talk more about neurodivergencies. And how can we encourage people to do that? Well, if nothing else, I'm a bit of an oversharer. So I'm going to use that as an opportunity to encourage others to be able to talk about their feelings about their own neurodivergencies, their own suspicions they make, something that makes them neurodivergent. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I found out that I was, how it's affected me, and go from there. So, ancient past, let me get my notes up here, because this is reasonably lengthy and I don't want to go over everything. So, looking back, now that I've been diagnosed, it's kind of easy to see a pattern in my history. So, when I was 10, 11, we did a lot of moving. My parents somehow didn't murder me or my brother going through 7 house fall throughs when they were literally about to give the keys over and then the contracts would fall through. So we spent 2 years moving to different parts of the country, at one point living in a travel lodge for 3 months. Not great for any kid. But on top of that, I started to show the symptoms of then ADHD, although it was very, very poorly understood when I was that age, certainly in the UK anyway. I went from being a child who was past the 11 plus. I was predicted to go to Cambridge, Oxford, my choice of university, become a doctor or professor or whatever. And instead, what happened is I came out of GCSEs at the end with barely passing my GCSEs, was very unhappy teenager, was not very well put together, shall we say. Now, the reason I tell you this is that now schools have more understanding of neurodivergencies and they're able to spot and support folk. Didn't have that so much back when I was young, but it's had a massive influence on me. So going into my 20s, I struggled with relationships. I didn't make many friends because I didn't understand how people worked. I struggled to hold down a job. I quite often hop from job to job as soon as I started to feel the effects of burnout. I was poor at financial organisation. So I quite often find myself needing to engage in risky behaviour to be able to get hold of cash, to be able to pay bills, things like that. So what actually changed? Well, one of my jobs that somehow I accidentally ended up working as a stop smoking advisor. I've never smoked in my life, but I did this job and I actually really enjoyed it somehow. And it kind of made me second guess things a little bit. And I went, well, actually, sometimes the path leads you in life to something you don't expect to enjoy, but you really end up enjoying. I then ended up working at a company called MindBody and took an opportunity to work in data services, to learn SQL to be able to do scripting. And as a result of that, I found something I actually really enjoyed. As a teenager, I really liked the idea of doing IT, but it was something I just couldn't stick with. And I was lucky that MindBody gave me private health insurance. I got a diagnosis for ADHD after someone suggested I should do it. That was a life-changing diagnosis. It's what they actually call a good news diagnosis. So most time when you get diagnosed with something, it's a negative, right? You're thinking, crap, now I'm stuck with this, or I've got to do this. For me, finding out that I had ADHD was mind-blowing. I cannot describe how difficult it is to feel like you are struggling so much in life compared to everyone else and not being able to put your finger on why. Being able to say, oh no, actually, the reason that I'm really disorganized is because people with ADHD literally view time differently. It is staggering. So I got a diagnosis, but this was right at the start of COVID, and it was difficult. I wasn't able to get medication at the time, so it took me a bit longer to start and do medication. But again, once I did, it was another transformative experience. So I went from being someone who would really, really struggle to be able to put together a calendar, to see a work week through, to see a project from start to finish, to suddenly being able to just think, oh no, I need to go and do the dishes, and then just getting up and going and do the dishes. That might seem like a really mundane thing, but it does sometimes feel like, or it did sometimes feel to me, that I was trapped in my own body. And that leads me to something I want to talk a little bit more on, which is something called executive dysfunction. Have folk heard this term before? So there is a perception among some people that, so for example, what was often said of me was I was lazy. I wasn't motivated. I was quite capable, but just didn't put the effort in. From my perspective, especially with the hindsight of knowing what was causing these problems, I could quite often be sat at home on my sofa, hyperfixating on something, quite often games, to be honest. And I would want to go and do, say, for example, the dishes, but I just couldn't. I would think, no, I need to do the dishes. I absolutely need to do the dishes. And it would build up into a thing in my head where I just couldn't get up to go and do the dishes. And it would feel like I was screaming in my own head at me to go and do the dishes. And this would happen for everything. It was a dominating part of my life. But from the outside, people would just perceive it as laziness. They just sat on the sofa. They're not doing anything. The flat's getting a mess. They haven't gone and had a shower for a week. But in reality, my brain was just screaming out for the only bit of dopamine that it could get, which was playing World of Warcraft. So this is it's something that really needs to be talked more about, but it's quite difficult to be able to put into words. So please just bear in mind, sometimes you might see people struggling, might not be able to put their finger on why, they might not be able to put their finger on why. It's good to have a chat about, why are you struggling? Is there anything that we can help with? By the way, if anyone is thinking some of these things apply to me, or they're on the fence about going and getting a diagnosis, I can fully recommend it. I have got some links at the end for where folk can get a bit more direction for that. So, to our main question, is there neurodiversity in tech? Can anyone give me the answer? Yes. Absolutely, yes, because we know that there is neurodiversity in everything. So, better question then. Neurodivergence in tech. Anyone want to guess at percentages, figures, anything that, where do we think we are with neurodivergence in tech? Higher than average? Cool, we've got some 30 percentages over there. Well, 75, we don't know. There is really, really little studying done into neurodivergences. I did a lot of research before this talk to try and find anything, and the closest I could find was a study in America, which I have links to in the slide notes for anyone who gets hold of those, where they found that there was a higher prevalence of neurodivergency in American college kids going to STEM. That's about as good as it gets. So, but you might be going, where is my elephant then? Like, what is it then? If we don't know. But I think if we look at some of the traits that are associated with the two things that I've primarily gone through, if we look at autism and ADHD, you'll probably start to see a pattern for things that we often see in software engineers. Let me step back a little bit so that folk over there can see. So, so from the autism side of things, more likely to be introverted, prefer routine, prefer quieter spaces, have highly specific interests like learning to go. An ADHD, we see fast learners, have a hyper focus, rapid thinking. Some of these things you might even see as things we would actively go out and look for as businesses, as associates, people that we want to work with. I mean, everyone wants to work with other people that learn fast, right? And the kind of overwhelming description is people thinking outside the box. And that's something that gets thrown around a lot, like as devs, we want people to think outside the box, but what does that actually mean? Sort of means not thinking neurotypically to an extent. People with neurodivergences think differently. They think the box, if you think about it, is neurotypical thinking. So it's almost like we're purpose built for these things. So what can tech as an industry actually do to help this? So I'm going to preface this by saying, again, that I'm not an expert. My main goal here is to encourage folks to talk about these things. So I've popped some stuff up on here, but I would very much encourage people to go back to talk to their teams, talk to their friends. They don't even need to work in tech. Just try to understand folk a little bit better and encourage them to try and understand both themselves and others a little bit better. Which sounds like the most sweeping statement in the universe, isn't it? So yeah, talk about it. In terms of some more specific things that I've found have worked for me in a tech environment, it's setting expectations clearly, because we've all been in situations where one person has said something and understood something to mean things a certain way, and someone else has understood things a different way. Very clear expectations. Playing to strengths, it's going to be a fair bit of overlap with what Jenny was talking about earlier here, actually. Being flexible. So say, for example, someone needs to go and see a therapist to be able to help them work through things. I would go out on a limb and say that most of the folk, if you're driven enough to be in here, probably are working for companies that do most of these things anyway. But it's more about talking of them in the context of folk with neurodivergences. Consider the environment, and I don't mean the planet, although we should do that. I'm thinking offices, right? It's a bit bad for a lot of us at the moment, needing to go into offices. But rather than thinking about it necessarily just through the lens of people just don't want to pay to come into the office, people want to live where it's cheap, which are all perfectly valid reasons. Think about it also, actually, the environment in the office is quite loud. And for someone, say for example myself, who has sensory issues, sometimes that can actually be super distracting, and you find the office a really difficult place to work in. If, for example, there's a lot of people talking, or there's a lot of loud music playing. Particularly in my case, it's music I can't sing to. Be mindful of language. So, going to use an example here, but a little bit more esoteric. But if, say, for example, you're working a particular style where you want to size a piece of work, and you've got maybe someone who has fallen outside of the norm for people of size a piece of work, maybe consider not leaping on that person or making comments about how they've already done the work because they've underestimated compared to everyone else. Now, I primarily say that because for a lot of neurodivergent folk, there is something called sort of masking or hiding, where you learn as a defense mechanism to sort of go with the social norm. And calling folk out on that can go badly. It can basically put them back in their shell. We don't want that, obviously. We want people to feel free to express their opinion. And checking in on each other. Again, really sweeping statement, but we just need to say more to people, like, how are you actually doing? Like, how are you actually finding things? Like, did that work for you? Was that piece of work more stressful than it needed to be? Could you take on more? Do you feel like you'd be better suited to this sort of work? So that leads on to wider scale. And this is where I was most intrigued by what Jenny was going over, which I put down as ways of working. Obviously, Jenny went into much more detail, way more useful. But for me, ways of working, going in and chatting with my team members, understanding where our differences are, where certain ways that we're working and not working for me, And doing that on a regular basis when someone joins the team, going in and redoing that, because the team dynamic changes, right? Even if a single person joins a team of 10, that shakes things up. And it's good to not only set expectations for how everyone else is working, but say, okay, so how can we integrate you into the team and make sure that you are comfortable where you're working and you understand that some people prefer different ways of communicating. Help neurodivergent causes. If you have the ability in your company to say, hey, let's go out and help X amount of people this year, consider maybe looking at neurodivergent schools or education places, going, hey, let's go and do something to do with coding with them. Because you'll often find that neurodivergent kids love coding. So yeah, get involved. Again, quite a sweeping statement, not always the easiest thing to do, but again, drip feed. If we get more companies doing this, it's going to help us in the long run. Supporting individuals attending appointments and considering hiring practices. So this is a big one for me with the way that I work. So we tend to have a kind of approach, right? Where we look at doing an interview, and then typically most places will do a tech test, either a take home or with other people. It's not always the best of ways for some people. So, for example, some ADHD people prefer only co-pairing because they like working with someone else who can tie them down and stop them getting distracted. So a take-home tech test isn't going to be great for them. They're not going to be able to shine and show the strengths that they can potentially bring to a company in the same way that they could do by doing a tech test with another person, and vice versa. And specialist services. There exists a number of specialist services which I haven't personally dug into, so I haven't listed any in the resources on here, but places that will help you as an individual or as a team, as a company, to support those with neurodivergences. Whether or not that be, oh, we can coach this specific person, or just giving general information as a company as to how to build policies to ensure that people sort of aren't left behind. So, a couple of resources here. We've got autism.org.uk and ADHDuk.co.uk, both pretty decent websites with lots of cool information, and you can get lost on those for quite a while. And also, there's a book here which thankfully shortens to ADHD 2.0, which I listened to on Audible on holiday. I just went on to. Only about 5 hours long, super useful. Honestly, I would recommend this for anyone, but particularly if you know someone with ADHD and you want to understand how their brain works. Super useful book. Thoroughly recommend it. Cool. So that's enough of me largely talking. Questions?
So first of all, thank you, Rick. That was fantastic. I know we've just had a round of applause. Honestly, that was great. We have someone from the LV team who's able to take a roving mic round, and I'll double up. Colin's got a roving mic. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand and we'll take it from there. Anyone with a question?
If I should be relieved or not.
Surely someone wants to know something. You have on yourself, Colin?
I've got one. Yeah.
Go for it.
So, I think my daughter's got ADHD, so she's been sort of seen by doctor and everything. She's going down that track basically. One of the things that we look at as a parent is how much time she spends on devices, and whether, for example, we know when she's having like a lively period, it was a good way to calm her down. But similarly, maybe noticing that it can also be a trigger for sort of behavioural things as well. I'm just wondering from your experience, whether you're noticing that in your own behaviours and whether spending too much time on devices has an impact on, talk about executive dysfunction. Do you think there's a correlation there?
it's something that I've considered at length. I mean, as a millennial, I've sort of had very easy access to a lot of technology, right? There is I'm desperately trying to remember the name of the term for it, which was given in the ADHD. There's a kind of societal version of ADHD that a lot of ordinary folk have picked up because we are required as human beings to be way more active. Our brains are way more active than a peasant from 600 years ago in feudal France, right? Like we have to think constantly, whether or not that be at work or on our phone. We're like, what's Mark up to? Let's go to check with George. Like I can reach out, I can speak to people all the time. It's so easy now to be able to just go and find something that just constantly gives us a bit of dopamine. And yes, I do think that there is a level of self-destructiveness with that. I don't know I'd go quite so far as to say addiction. Folk, particularly with ADHD, are more susceptible to addiction, and that actually leads to, interestingly, about a 27-year average less lifespan expectancy of about 27 years less for someone with ADHD as a result of things like addiction. However, not being a parent myself, can't really advise how to avoid that. It is very difficult, again, when you're, as parents, trying to manage your own busy lives and also trying to find something healthy for your kids that isn't just a phone or a computer. I think probably the thing that I wish I'd done earlier was channeled that into more constructive things on electronics. If I picked up coding when I was 16, we might have had a third mobile option by now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Rin. We've got another question over here. Hiya. So I'm fairly sure I've got ADHD, but I've not got a huge desire to get a diagnosis. Would you say it's benefited you to have one particularly, or would you? Yeah, that's about it.
For me, yes, and that primarily for me that's because I needed the medication because my ADHD is serious enough that without the medication I'm largely not functioning. I don't think it necessarily works for everyone. I think actually for a lot of folk, looking up and recognizing what the symptoms of ADHD actually are can be massively helpful, and that's why it was described as a good news diagnosis, because the instant I found out that I had ADHD and was able to spot my own behaviors and head them off and go, oh, actually that's why I go into unhealthy spirals, that in itself was a really, really beneficial tool in my arsenal. So no, you don't have to get diagnosed. What I would say, if for anyone who's looking into that, if you can try and go private, the average waiting time as of 22 for ADHD diagnosis on the NHS is about 8 years. And the waiting lists for private places filled up during COVID, and I think most of them now are about a 6 or 7 month wait to get initial appointment and diagnosis as well. So get in while you can.
Thank you very much, Ren. Got one more question here.
If anyone's waiting, raise your hand so I can come down to you. So thanks a lot for comment. The question, have you heard of or used the government service Access to Work?
Yes, it rings a bell. Yeah, I can't remember the specifics. Is that the one where they will give you funding to be able to help you get support with going for jobs and things like that? Is that the one you're thinking of?
Yes, and actually beyond that, so in work, so as a disabled co-founder of the company, we have used it. I say we, me and my co-founder are both neurodivergent as well. Autism, ADHD, and so on, but we found it quite useful to deal with that, and it is a government service that, yeah, you can apply for, and effectively anything that is any kind of disability,
Okay.
whether that be neurodivergent or physical. So it's definitely something that everybody should look into, potentially, if they are diverse. So if you haven't heard of it, I would recommend looking into it.
Yeah.
I'm a drifter, person that uses it. So yeah, it definitely helps out. It's basically the IT of the work in a weird way. Personal independence and
yeah, I think that's why I avoided looking more into it, because having skirted the edges of going through a pit before, if anyone's done one of those things, you kind of almost need to claim for a second one after going through the first application. But I'll have a look and see if I can dig it out. Thank you.
Do we have any further questions? I saw one more hand sort of raised somewhere down here. Cole, do you want to handle it? If anyone else has got a question as well, I'll bring the mic round ready to follow. Sorry, there you go.
Hi, so I'm in contact with someone with depression, and one of the things that they said was they had really high highs and really low lows. So being in contact with someone like that, I'm not familiar with how to deal with the lows, because the highs there are really high. And it's exciting, but when they're really low, I don't really know how to maneuver that, because I almost feel like I've done something wrong, although I haven't done anything wrong, and it's partly what you're feeling.
Yeah. So something I didn't touch on very much, but one of the big drivers for me getting my diagnosis was my mood swings. And I could literally go from being like perfectly normal to someone saying something that would feel really innocuous. It would just set me off, and I'd go into a spiral. I did a shutdown, or I'd get quite angry. It's very difficult to know how to deal with that. I can only talk from my personal experience, but when I'm in that headspace, I'm very much a case of I want to be left alone. Just leave me right alone. Let me chill out. Let me process or quite often over process, but get to a point where I can't take in anything else and sort of reach out. Can't necessarily say that speaks for everyone. It's not always the easiest, but getting therapy to help process through things is a lifesaver. I mean, it's good for anyone, but particularly for folk with ADHD or autism, it's useful to be able to process through how you're feeling, how it's different, and pick up coping mechanisms, recognizing when the mood is going lower. Very difficult to be able to say as an outside person. I think, it has affected my relationships. The ones where the relationships have gone better have been people who have just been overwhelmingly patient, shall we say. Sorry, I know that doesn't really answer your question.
Thank you very much for that, Rin. I hate to, we've got time for 2 more questions. We've got one here. If anyone else is interested, and we'll go from there. It's just so that people from the live stream get a chance to ask their questions as well. So we've got one question here.
Hi, thank you. I was really interested in, it might have been an offhand comment, but what you said earlier about people with ADHD actually experiencing time in quite a different way. I think as somebody who's maybe like seen some of the criteria for ADHD and recognized some of those things in myself, but also experience anxiety around kind of time management and perception of time, I was just interested to hear maybe you expand upon that slightly.
So this is actually a relatively recent revelation for me as a result of this. I cannot recommend this book enough. The person who wrote it, whose name I forget off the top of my head, said that folk with ADHD have 2 settings. They have now and not now. And it has gotten to the point where, for me, if I want to do something, I literally have a whiteboard of things that need to do now. And I look at it every day and I go, is this a now thing or is this a later thing? Because otherwise my time management, my organisation is so poor that it gets out of control. But when I say now or later, I mean I can't think oh, I have to go and do this thing at 5 p.m, right? If I have to do something at 5 p.m, I get up at 10 and I'm like, I have to do the thing at 5 p.m. I can't do anything else. I'm going to sit here. The thing is coming at 5 p.m. I can't go anywhere. I can't do a thing because it's coming at 5 p.m. Because I have to have it in my now. Because if I think later, then it'll get to 6 p.m. and I'll go, oh, crap. Yeah. It's strange. I cannot envision how people don't work like that.
Thank you very much for that. We've got time for one more question from the room, if anyone's got one. Otherwise, I'll come up and say my thank yous. Okay, thank you very much, Rin.
Thank you.
So I appreciate that we're getting to the time of the evening where people have had to head off. First of all, I want to say a quick thank you because you as a collective have made this the busiest social code we've ever had by a country mile. So thank you to all of you. From experience of knowing what you are like, can I just assume that the vast majority of you plan to stay for a couple of drinks? Yeah. I'll take the cheers. So we've got a little bit left on the tab. And hoping, Mary, we've got room for one more extension. Yeah, we've got room for one more tab extension. Best news of that. We have got this room for a little bit longer. This is the time of the evening where I would encourage everyone to meet the people around them, experience the tech community, make the most of it, because this is where some fantastic friendships are being born, some partnerships are being born. But in all seriousness, for the last 2 years, I am eternally grateful. Thank you so much. And as one last shameless plug, if anyone can have plans tomorrow, I'm on at the main stage of Victoria Basket Tech Festival at 1 p.m. And but in all seriousness, have a great night, everyone. We've got this room for a little while longer. The wristbands you got when you came in, once the tab runs out, we can go upstairs and they get you discount on drinks. We've sorted you out for the entire evening. So that's the good news. But first of all, thank you to the AV team, marketing, and to Colin and Imogen who brought this all together. Thank you to Jenny, Rin, Dave, and Gareth for sorting the evening out and being our speakers. Mary and everyone else for contributing to the running of this event, because trust me, they're not cheap anymore. If anyone is interested in speaking going forward, I always ask. I'll rope some of you into it if you don't ask me by the end of tonight. But if anyone's interested in speaking or anyone's interested in partnering with us going forward, we're always interested. Come and grab me before the end of the night. But let's have a few drinks. Let's get the lights up. Let's all get chatting and have a great evening, everyone.